Good morning all, and welcome to the Development Management Committee meeting. Before we get on with the business in hand, we'll just go around and introduce ourselves, starting with Councillor Moody.
Councillor Jeff Moody, Tavistock North.
Councillor Graham Reid, also Tavistock North Ward.
Tony Leach, Oakhampton North.
Reminder the committee to speak forcibly into their microphones. Just go around again then, Councillor Moody.
Councillor Jeff Moody, Tavistock North.
Councillor Graham Reid, Tavistock North Ward.
Councillor Tony Leach, Oakhampton North.
Councillor Neil Jory, Milton Ford Ward.
Sam Wakeham, Councillor for Hatherley.
Councillor Alistair Cunningham, Buckler Monacorum Ward.
Caroline Mott, Bridgestow.
Terry Southcott, Bridgestow Ward.
Seamus Machin, the agricultural consultant for the council.
Bryony Hanlon, and I'm Senior Planning Officer.
Jacqueline Houselander, Head of Development Management for West Devon.
Councillor Rick Cheadle, Buckler Monacorum and Chair of the Planning Committee.
Councillor Steve Guthrie, Drew Stainton Ward.
Catherine Hoare, Democratic Services Officer for West Devon.
Can I just ask now, can you hear clearly? Back? Yes? You can, thank you. Apologies for absence, I don't think we have any.
We have no apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3 on the agenda is the declaration of interests. In accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any item to be considered at this meeting. I believe we have a couple of declarations. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. I see from the list of speakers that Mr. Crozier is due to speak, and I need to declare that I had a phone conversation with him yesterday about one of the applications on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Housecott.
Exactly the same declaration. I had a similar phone call from the same person.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Chair. The same application, item 7A. I have visited this site and I know the applicants from about 4 or 5 years ago when I visited the site in a professional capacity in my job with Business Information Point. Obviously related to aspects of the business at that time. I'm no longer working for Business Information Point, and the work that I did at that time I don't think in any way stops me from being objective about the information that is in front of us today.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Yes, Mr. Harling has done work for the Hub Club site, and as I'm chairman of that also, I've met him as a part of that process.
Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is items requiring urgent attention. None have been brought to my notice. So item 5 is the confirmation of the minutes of our last meeting held on the 21st of April. Can I take those as an accurate record, please? All show. Thank you. We don't have a legal advisor this morning. He's unable to join us. As you are aware, he reads out a statement, which I will paraphrase, saying, of course, that when we come to make decisions, we use the development plan as our starting point and then look for other material considerations, and that planning applications are about the appropriate use of land, not other more personal issues. I won't continue reading that out. I think you're very familiar with the statement he makes. Okay, thank you for that. So we're now on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the planning applications themselves. And the first one is 033525 FUL, Harling Farm, Beeralston. And I hand over to the planning officer for her brief.
Okay, so this one is for the siting of a temporary agricultural workers' dwelling for 3 years to fully establish the business. So this is the site location plan. The red line just shows the land necessary to access the highway and the site of the caravan that's there. This is the aerial view. I've put an orange sort of teardrop shape at the location where the agricultural workers' dwelling is sited, just so that you can see it in context. This is the site location plan from the planning application. There's a slightly extended red line just so that the drainage scheme can be accommodated. So that's why it looks as it does. And that just shows that in more detail. So this is the caravan that's there now. This just shows you from the south. And this is looking east to the site. And this is looking out from the site over the landscape. So the main issues with this application, the siting of the mobile home and its use as accommodation for an agricultural worker is not supported by an essential need. And then that lists the policies and the National Planning Policy Framework paragraph 84A that relates to. And the siting doesn't respond positively to the landscape character, bearing in mind that the site is located within the Tamar Valley National Landscape. And then that just cites those policies and the National Planning Policy Framework paragraph 189 there. And on that basis, officers have recommended refusal.
Thank you very much. Could I have questions for the planning officer from the committee? If there are any, Councillor Jury.
Thank you. I'm minded to think about a recent case that came before the planning, this planning committee, this DM&L committee, which was a property in Lifton. I'm trying to remember, is it Woolerden Farm, which we refused and went to appeal and was allowed. This development seems to be much more modest by comparison, but I'm just wondering whether there are any parallels between those two and if there is anything that we should learn from the appeal being allowed in that previous case.
So as ever, each case is determined on its own merits. The case for Woolerden, that was a reserved matters application where the principle of an agricultural workers' dwelling had been established. The main differences between the two sites, in Woolerden they'd established the principle of an agricultural workers' dwelling, and what we were assessing was the scale and the design of it. In this instance, we haven't been able to establish the functional need. And in terms of the actual design and built form, they've obviously come in with that, the mobile home that you saw. That's quite a common practice when people come in for temporary consents. Those, the scale of it is not at issue.
Any other questions? I have one. Could you just go back to the slide that shows the red line, the curtilage of the... Thank you. Given that the application is to see if there is scope for an agricultural worker, are we talking about the agriculture that takes place within the red line? Or are we talking about the need for an agricultural worker for agriculture that lies outside the red line? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the agricultural activities lie outside the red line.
They lie outside the red line. The red line is simply the curtilage of the property's boundary. as it were.
Plus the drainage.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, did this erection have a planning consent 3 years ago?
So it had a planning consent back in 2020, and that was for a 3-year temporary consent for the same structure to allow them to establish the business.
Okay, next question. You state essential need. Could you explain how you come to that decision in your previous slide?
So that would be something that the agricultural consultant, Mr. Machin, would assess. So you can direct questions to him.
Can he answer that now or at some point in a minute?
Yes, Councillor. Need is normally ascertained through two methods. One, that there's a full-time need. So usually you can look at, with conventional agriculture, there's standard mandate labour requirements, which you can see how that fits in to make sure there's a full-time need, whether it's cow, sheep, pig, conventional activities. And then there's an assessment made whether, however many units of labour are needed, how many actually need to live on site to manage what's happening there, whether that's animals or glass houses with ventilation and water, whether it's chickens or whatever. So there's a method to look at standard mandates, and then that is interpreted to see whether there is a need for somebody to be on site. I mean, it's slightly subjective that you need to be on site to look after whatever you need to look after, whether that's livestock and emergencies, things that happen out of hours. So that's how the assessment is made.
So if the business model that they have, if their business expands and they then need an agricultural worker, and in the meantime this facility has been withdrawn or demolished, what will they have to do then?
Sorry, say that again in terms of what.
If this refusal goes through and that accommodation is no longer available, and the business owners decide to expand by employing a full-time agricultural worker, where are they going to site that worker?
Well, I suppose that then boils down to whether there's anything suitable or available in the vicinity or locally, and whether the need can be met by living off-site, and that's
so that person will be out the way when the cows have a problem at 3 in the morning. They're 2 miles away and they're bed asleep, are they?
Well,
is that what you're suggesting?
The issue, I don't know whether there's cows involved, and I was going to come on to that at some time, which we discussed earlier in terms of the definition of an agricultural workers dwelling, or an agriculture in terms of planning. There are so many things happening at this site that I wouldn't call agriculture in terms of the dog breeding, the dog training, all the other things. So I'm not sure the wording of the application in terms of an agricultural worker is correct. I mean, there are plenty of examples, equine and examples that are undertaken here, that you would say is a rural worker dwelling rather than an agricultural worker. I don't think what happens here in terms of both the need and also the financial implications of the enterprises are agriculture.
I might just remind you also, Councillor Reid, that we're dealing with the application that's in front of us, not an application that might be in front of us in a couple of years' time.
Absolutely, sir. But more importantly, how many objections have been received from the community?
I just have to tell you that the number of representations that we receive, it doesn't matter whether it's 1 or 20 or 50. We have written in the report what the objections and the letters of support have said, and that's what you need to consider today.
Why I ask this because a previous planning meeting, not recently, we had a list of those in favour and those against, so the numbers were clearly in support of one side of the argument.
Yes, but it's the quality of the argument, not the quantity, that we consider. Any other questions for Councillor Moody?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officers, for your report. Going back to this question about agricultural need, the policy test, you've outlined in general terms how one might assess an application. But what you haven't given us is the evidence behind that. And what I'd like to know is how the functional and financial tests have been applied. rather than just a general statement, subjective statement that they don't comply. I would like to know the evidence behind that, please.
Yes, Councillor. It's my experience looking at the enterprises that are undertaken there that it's my opinion, obviously the applicant's got an agent and they've got their opinion, that there isn't a need to live on site to, for example, and we can run through it, whether it's dog training, whether it's secure field private hire, whether it's educational sessions. The argument would be that I think that can be managed by living on site. There's not an essential need to live on site where you've got cows calving, chicken with ventilation problems, all the other that you would associate with sort of conventional agriculture. And then financially, we've looked at that. Obviously, my involvement goes back to 2020 when I did a pre-app on this and saw it during COVID. And then again, I think I recommended that they were given another year after the 3-year initial temporary period because of COVID and the effects on their business to try and get to a financial level that there was a profit, it was viable, it was sustainable. Obviously, the applicants took that on board and then have come in with a different application for 3 years.
Thank you for that. So you're saying that you feel that the types of animals wouldn't require a permanent person on site. But the financial test, can you go into it further about how you weighed the issues within the financial tests? And how did you come to your conclusions? Because it's not in the report how that was made. It was just, what we've got in the report is simply that it's not acceptable.
I understand that, Chair. Are we allowed to talk about exact figures or just, I don't think we are probably in the public domain that we're talking in with it being streamed. But I've had
I think because we haven't got the sort of facts and figures in front of us, I think it'd be better you talk in more general terms about how you've come to your assessment.
No, that's fine, Chair. Yes, projections and forecasts are normally provided, particularly with temporary dwelling applications. If it's a permanent dwelling, then you'd look back over the last 3 years' accounts to see the level of profitability and whether there's a chance of it carrying on. So the temporary dwelling application that we've seen, we've had projections and we've had forecasts of income and expenditure, and I've assessed those, and that's how we've come to our conclusion.
Thank you for that. I have a question for the officer. Given that the temporary dwelling was previously granted back in 2020, can you explain why a further period is not justified, and what has changed in the intervening years that made it acceptable then but not acceptable now?
So at the time that they had come in for the original consent in 2020, I think they were at the point where they were beginning and establishing their business. So there are quite a few times where people will put together a business plan and their finances, and they'll set out the activities that they want to do. They'll submit that to the planning office, and then Mr. Machin will assess it and will say that, yes, there's enough there to give them a 3-year consent. They then live on site and they build the business. And then at the end of that time, they've got, as Mr. Machin said, for a permanent dwelling, they've got 3 years of accounts to demonstrate that they need to live on site in terms of the function, and then that their business is profitable enough to pay the agricultural worker and finance the dwelling. So if you think back to 2020, we obviously got hit with COVID, and the applicant did suffer quite badly with that. So the 3-year period was not representative of normal economic conditions. So that's why they have come back in for extra time. But they'll obviously have their own time to speak, so you can ask them for the detail of that.
So actually nothing has changed other than they were starting a business in 2020, COVID came in, and then this application has come in now to extend. Presumably, I'll ask the applicant later. My other question is.
Could I just clarify actually the point there? The application in 2020 was for 3 years to allow them to establish the business. They then had a further year to continue to establish their business. They've now had 6 years to establish the agricultural enterprise. they have not managed to do that, which is why Seamus has recommended that it not be allowed. So I think you need to be really clear. This application is actually being asked for as an agricultural workers' dwelling only, and it is not. It's not related to other elements that they might be carrying out on the site.
No, I do understand that. I just understand that COVID came in the middle of it. My final question is, can you identify the visual impacts of you were talking about that it's incongruous into the countryside? It's a similar question. It was acceptable 5 years, 6 years ago. And what has changed in the meantime?
So the Tamar Valley National Landscape did object to the application in terms of its landscape impact. And they also talked about that it might be possible to do some landscaping if the unit met the essential functional need. So that's kind of where they came from on that one.
Just ask one more question. With the weighting, that's what we're here for, is the weighting of these policies. Which are the most important policies and which are the less important of those policies from agricultural need, temporary permission, and landscape harm? How do you weigh those when you're looking at your decision making?
So the weight that's been applied is outlined in the planning officer's report.
Councillor Reid, it looks as though you have a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I note on the consultations the only objection is, as just stated, from the TVNL. I can't find the details within the report. Is it there? Have I missed it somewhere? Or is it a separate document?
So when officers write their planning reports, they don't always include all of the comments of all of the consultees, because it would mean that the reports would be enormously long. So all documents are online, and if there's anything in a report that you want to ask a question about, you are very welcome to speak to the planning officer. Her detailed comments are available online, and the case officer has summarised her concerns in the report.
Taking into account the pictures we've seen today from the presentation, how strong is their objection? I find those pictures show a building very close to others from most directions. It's virtually invisible. I don't see why this should be a big issue for the landscape.
Can I pop in here, please? I seem to feel that we are challenging the process rather than the application itself. And we need to remember and focus on the application that's before us, not on possibilities and not on could-bes or wannabes. I feel that this is starting to drift in the realms of not dealing with this particular application at the moment.
Chair, I was making comments on policy.
Okay, well, Councillor Leach.
So I'll change the subject slightly. So they had permission for 4 years, which finished in 2024. Has the applicant come back to the council in 2024 with a pre-app or anything else?
So what happened was they had permission for 3 years. At the end of that, they then came in for a full application for a permanent dwelling. And we looked at that and advised we wouldn't be able to support it. So they then came in for the temporary extension. And during the life of that application, we then gave them a further year to submit accounts. And then obviously we've reached the conclusion that we have at this point.
But nothing since. So it's been 2 years. And then this has come in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Wakem.
Thank you, Chair. I see that some of their activities are horse livery and cat breeding. Now, that is not agricultural, but it's still looking after animals. So would they have to put in a different application in order to be on site to look after those animals and be there for emergencies?
That would be open to them, yes, outside this process. But we just have to consider the agricultural elements today.
Okay, we'll move on. We have 2 registered speakers for this application, and the first is Nicola Quick. Do come and join us here. Okay, welcome to the committee. You have 3 minutes to speak to the committee. The committee then has an opportunity to ask you questions. So when you're ready, press the right-hand button on your speaker. Try and move the thing as close to you as you can so that we can all hear what you've got to say. And when you're ready, off you go.
Thank you. The applicants purchased Harling Farm in October 2019. Following pre-application advice, permission was granted in June 2020 for a temporary agricultural workers dwelling for 4 years in the form of a lodge while this business established. Since then, several applications have supported the farm's development. In June 2024, an outline application for a permanent dwelling was submitted, but later withdrawn following officer advice to reapply for temporary consent. The current application, submitted in February 2025, is therefore a result of that guidance. Turning to the reasons for refusal, I'll address the second reason first, for the siting of the mobile home does not respond positively to local vernacular. We strongly refute this. The proposed dwelling is a lodge that was previously approved by this local authority in 2020, and there has been no material change to justify a different conclusion. The main reason for refusal is the lack of claimed essential need. Since 2020, the business has been open and transparent about the challenges it's faced. COVID-19 delayed establishment, Devon County Council halted new provider approvals, and the issues with the equestrian arena application. As a result, the business adapted. This is a diversified agricultural holding, not a conventional farm, but one that is delivering significant social and environmental value. The farm comfortably meets the functional test requiring 1.59 standard men, with livestock numbers now exceeding those in the 2024 appraisal. These animals are central to the farm's operation and are the foundation of its educational and therapeutic activities. Without them, the people would not come. Harling Farm is a Tamar Valley National Landscape Host Farm, which was selected due to its sustainability and conservation merits, along with it being an example of good farming practices and husbandry. Under the Mid-Tier Countryside Stewardship Agreement, it completed 25 funded educational visits last year. In addition, most of its therapeutic provision has been delivered voluntarily in response to the demand from organisations supporting neurodiverse individuals and those with mental health needs. This has led to the creation of a pilot scheme self-funded by the applicants, which has proven successful. Over the past 2 years, necessary qualifications and accreditations have been achieved, enabling the formation of Daniel's Ride CIC to deliver educational and wellbeing courses on a sustainable business. Importantly, Harling Farm was approved onto Devon's Alternative Educational Framework in December 2025 and Cornwall's in April 2026. The farm's shop and cafe opened on the 1st of March 2026 and is already proving popular. The farm is also taking part in Open Farm Sunday alongside a Sen event on the Saturday, which is fully booked and funded by the National Lottery. The business has made a profit in 2025, and the accountant has confirmed that a profit was made for 2026, with the EBITDA profit estimated at around 40,000. This reflects only 1 month of the cafe and farm shop trading and excludes the forthcoming educational framework income. Given the 15-month determination period, the applicant will be happy to accept a 2-year extension if that assists members in supporting this application. Thank you.
Thank you
fast.
for that. Right, questions from the committee. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. Could you explain, please, how an educational provision meets an agricultural need?
So the animals, in terms of the actual animals on site, that meets the functional test in terms of the requirement to be on there, and that's taken by standard figures. And then, obviously, because in terms of a commercial farm, they would have lots of cows and selling them for meat. Obviously, our meat now goes through the farm shop, so the profit margin is going to be greater now because of the farm shop being open. But in terms of it's not a conventional farm, and I've admitted that already, in the fact that the therapeutic and educational needs, that people come and see the animals, work with the animals, and that has an added benefit, and I think that's a complete positive of the Harling farm. It's quite different to your standard day-to-day farming that's only based on the income of selling their produce.
Okay, but COVID aside, and I appreciate that's had an impact on this particular business, as it has with many, the reality is you've had nearly 6 years now to prove a need, and that still has failed to be met with the assessment from our agricultural advisor. And going by the report, I'm struggling to see how an extension would be justified based on the evidence given and the reports that have been given.
Thank you. I actually disagree. The functional test has been met. It's on page 12 of my report. Obviously, me and Seamus are at a difference on opinion on that. We've stipulated the animals there. We actually have more animals on farm than in that report. That's proven that there's a functional need for us to be on site. And then in terms of the financial side, because of the diverse nature of this business, it has been really challenging, because not only have they had COVID in terms of getting set up and physically getting on site to establish the business, also in terms of the educational and therapeutic things, in terms of the financial side, a lot of those organisations closed application windows and things like that, and we've been waiting to get the training and qualifications necessary in order to apply for those grants and also be on those courses. We've now achieved all of that, and we're on all the frameworks, and now it's really taking off, and it feels a shame that obviously it's caused that such a significant delay, and actually we're now in the perfect position to be pushing forward with this business. We've got everything that we need, and obviously we have produced the profit the last 2 years, which I believe that we've met that essential need.
Councillor Moody.
Wrong button. Thank you. That's very helpful. I just wanted to move on to the financial viability. As I asked the officer before about explaining the decision, and are you in a position where you would be able to explain how the financial viability has changed and how it's capable of supporting a full-time worker?
I think the main difference between the two opinions in terms of the financial side is that we made a profit in 2025, but a significant proportion of that was grant funding, and sadly that was discounted by the council in its entirety, whereas so, for example, the mid-tier countryside stewardship that I referred to earlier, we've done 25 visits this year. That would come in as a form of a grant in terms of being shown on the accounts, but actually it's not a one-off payment. Like if you put up fencing, I appreciate once you put the fencing up, that's it. You're not going to go and put the fencing up again. But in terms of these educational visits, it comes in forms of grant, but actually that is a recurring thing. Last year they earned nearly 10,000 off the back of doing those educational visits. And yes, we've got national lottery funding for some of the therapeutic things and stuff like that. And I do appreciate there is an element of risk. But I believe there's an element of risk with any economic market, whether that's the general beef prices or not. Obviously, they are reducing those issues in terms of having the farm shop now and able to get a better margin than being open to the elements. But in terms of the frameworks that they've got on now, those are 5-year frameworks. So there's security in that income coming in. And as I've said, we've produced a profit last year in the last 2 years.
Thank you for that. So, but just for clarity, so the regular income through grants will flow for 5 years. Is that what you're saying?
So not to the same level, because obviously the fencing has been done, but there will be a proportion of it that will continue, and obviously it's going to come in different forms, because now we're on the Devon framework and the Cornwall framework for these educational visits. That will come in separately, and obviously that will be shown separate on the accounts, and we'll make sure that's stripped out, because obviously subject to members' decision, if this was to be approved, we'd obviously be coming back in a few years for a permanent dwelling.
Councillor Reid, Councillor Mott, Councillor Jury, Councillor Guthrie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit concerned when in your presentation, Nicola, you mentioned about an application being submitted and then withdrawn on officer's advice in exchange for this current application. Is that correct?
Yep.
What was the previous application that was put forward and recommended to be withdrawn?
So we put in so at the end of the 4 years of the consent that we were granted, we then put in an application for a permanent dwelling. Obviously, we explained the reason for the financials not being as per the 2020 submission due to all the reasons that I've already detailed this morning. But obviously the financials weren't meeting what we said we were doing in 2020 due to COVID and all the other elements. So we were saying we submitted it and applied for the permanent dwelling, but they said because the financials weren't there, we recommend that you withdraw and reapply for a temporary dwelling in order to give yourself more time to establish the business, which is what we've done.
So if the current situation now shows a much improved financial position, then that counters against the advice given at the time in 2024.
Yeah, I do appreciate that point. Slightly in the council's defence, they wouldn't have seen sight of the 2025 accounts, which did show a profit, which we weren't in that position when we submitted in 2024. So time has carried on, and that is the problem. Is for the applicant, they've been in limbo since 2024 because they've had various applications with the council that we've been waiting for decisions on, and it's hard to know where to put their finances in terms of pushing the business forward when they don't know where they stand on certain applications.
Thank you, Chair. My question was the same as Councillor Reid's.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. Now I've managed to find the correct document. So you referred to your report.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that you've got listed in there is for 6 ponies on a full livery basis. Yep. And my apologies, I can't find it now, but I'm sure I saw somewhere either within the report or within as part of the application that the full livery is no longer running.
So they're not in terms of a... So the horses are part of the farm, so that's how we've done them, because they look after those horses 24/7, but they are looking after them for the benefit of the educational and therapeutic. So they're not owned by someone else. A normal livery would be Joe Bloggs down the road giving you their horse, paying you to look after it, whereas these are their own horses, and they're looking after themselves so that they can then use them for the educational and therapeutic activities, because they do like pony walks through the woods and grooming and all those sort of things, and there's actual qualified courses. There's an entire list on the website in terms of different courses that they now do in order to support.
Cut in there so it doesn't drift on. Can I confirm though, because in one part of your document, we're actually within 7.10 of your document, you refer to 4 Shetland ponies, but then within your table you say 6 ponies. So I'm just confused on some of the numbers.
4 Shetland ponies and 2 Welsh Section D ponies on that list. I'm looking at the same document. So it's 4 add 2 is the 6. But we actually have 2 more horses as well now, so that puts all of it much higher. But as at the time in 2024, that is what was correct.
I would argue that horses are not agricultural, but that's a different subject. Okay.
So in terms of National Planning Policy Framework...
It wasn't a question.
Okay, Councillor Guthrie.
Just a quick one on your funding, and well done so far for fielding so many questions. With the funding that was achieved, was there any specific funding that was achieved for wages for an agricultural worker, or was it for facilities?
In terms of the frameworks that they're on, or in terms of the grants?
No, just the grants that did you get funding?
So for example, the educational visits, they get paid £363 per visit. So obviously that is for the time.
No, I meant for the full-time agricultural worker. Did you apply for funding for a waged position for a full-time agricultural worker.
The grants you get paid to do stuff. You don't get paid the work.
No, there's many different types of grants that do fund.
Sorry, I'm talking about the Devon Borough countryside stewardship grants.
I'm talking about in general with all the funding that you've applied for.
Okay, in terms of the frameworks they get paid per person.
No, I'm asking about the general funding that you've applied for all the time since the business has been there. Have you applied and managed to get funding for an agricultural worker?
I don't know that there is funding out there for an agricultural worker.
There are some funds available, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I just have one. We sort of talked a lot about a lot of things, but the application actually is to justify or not the need for an on-site agricultural worker, and I haven't heard a great deal about the quantum of work that's going on that would demand an on-site agricultural worker. Could you just try and explain to me what that agricultural work is that would require an on-site,
absolutely
full-time on-site worker?
So we've got 2 suckler cows that calve. They've actually now got 6 sows. We said that we had 3 in the 2024 application, and obviously when they come to birthing, they need to be on hand for that. We've got ducks and chickens, and then obviously the horses, which I appreciate. Obviously there's been a disparity over equine and agriculture. Obviously horses grazing on ground is agriculture, and in terms of the National Planning Policy Framework, they refer to a rural workers dwelling, and maybe that should be how this should be headed, because this is a combination of the two in terms of agricultural and equine, if we're not going to be saying they're different. And then there's also the goats as well, alongside the sheep. So they've been busy lambing this spring. The problem is all of it's different times of year in terms of when they're calving down, when they're lambing and things like that, that they need to be on site.
Thank you. And I just have one question for the agriculture. That quantum of activity was in your view, as it were, when you came to make your assessment?
Sorry, looking at Nicola's report, obviously there's, as I mentioned to you before, the standard mandate calculation. Sorry, I'll get closer. The standard mandate calculation is in her report under, I think it's 710. I have to project a bit more, I guess. Yeah, no, that's okay, sorry. So yes, as I said earlier, the standard mandate calculation is done in Nicola's report there. She's got the 6 ponies on full livery basis at 2,850, which makes up a massive part of the labour requirements. And as I said earlier, the labour requirements are, I can give you an example of a big farm that's an arable farm that might take 3 or 4 men standard man days to work it, but it doesn't mean that you need 3 or 4 people on site at most times of the day and night to manage fields of corn. And therefore that assessment, that's one extreme. So we're looking at this and how many are needed and what the activities are. As I say, there's 2 suckler cows, 24 sheep. That I know these numbers have slightly changed. There's 6 sows, but my assessment doesn't both get to a full-time worker and require that need to be on site to look after. From my experience of dealing with many applications.
Thank you very much for clarifying that, Councillor Leach.
I've heard farm diversification mentioned a few times. How much of this diversification can be put into agriculture? And from the other officer's point of view, how much actually needs extra planning permission to do it?
The other activities, some of those do have planning permission, some of them don't. In terms of the percentage that of the activities which are agricultural, I'll refer that to my colleague in relation to that, but there are other activities in the educational visits and the therapeutic visits and what have you, and we're not here to criticise those activities, but what we are here to consider is there an agricultural need for that caravan? Lodge, sorry.
Hence my question. How much of the diversification side can be put within your assessment?
If I'm just looking at the agricultural side of it, then I'm discounting, and there's a list, it's easier to pick it up from the financial projections, so field hire, educational sessions, kittens, small equine farm tour, dog training, silver, bronze, gold, agility, pet first aid, dog exercise sessions, dog daycare, camping. I would say none of those fall under the definition of agriculture, for my assessment. But, you know, if you were looking at it in terms of a rural worker and an occupational dwelling, then I have seen plenty of diversification enterprises that fall under that umbrella, whether that's we had racing pigeons with West Devon Borough Council, you know, it's alpacas, it's all those sorts of minor, well, I don't call them minor, but you know, all those other activities that might fall under that umbrella. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you very much. We have another registered speaker, no stranger to this committee, Mr. Peter Crozier from Beer Alston Parish Council. Good morning.
Just to correct you, Beer Ferrers Parish Council.
Beer Ferrers Parish Council.
Yes.
Down here is Beer Alston.
Beer Alston is the modern town. Beer Alston is the ancient.
I stand corrected. When you're ready, you have 3 minutes.
I was a borough councillor at the time of this original application. The tortuous planning process is why I was asked to represent the Beer Ferrers Parish Council at this meeting. When I read the reports on Friday, I was astounded how negative they were and out of date. This is very serious for the people concerned. In putting to this committee, they should have the decency to appraise themselves of what this business had achieved before going into print. I did contact Chris Shears, who's online, and Seamus re this error. The planning officer unfortunately wasn't available. She doesn't work Fridays. The cafe was opened on the 1st of March, and a part of the one slight hiccup has been 4 days a week since and turned over just under £20,000 in the first 7 weeks. That is a game changer in this business. This is a small farm. To be profitable, it has to diversify, which is and has been for many years government policy. This applicant has restored a perfectly usable farm building of about 70 years old for the purposes that they require. The subject of this application would form a cluster of buildings with roof heights all similar. The Parish Council has not had one complaint about this development since the time it's been erected. The potential for a very limited development in rural areas is supported by the neighbourhood plan of Beer Ferrers. This business was set up with the sole purpose of making a living and giving their son a place where he could grow up and thrive in the countryside, which he loves. And with the animals, it is very important to him, as anyone who's worked with animals will know. This is a safe place for him to work and develop, with his very caring parents who are exceptional. This is why they've chosen this route in helping other parents with their children. Therefore, the applicants set up a pilot scheme funded purely by themselves, as this project is so close to home, to see if there was a need to provide education and well-being sessions within a rural setting. This is a very valuable and well-known exercise for people who have diverse needs. If you want to destroy this family and business, you must overturn this motion with the power that you have in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. Crozier? Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Councillor Crozier. I perhaps should have asked this earlier, but I will ask you, with your planning expertise and your knowledge of the case, do you think the problem with this application is that it's gone down the route of citing an agricultural worker rather than, as TTV 26 talks about, a rural worker? And is there anything we can do about that? And perhaps the planning officers might comment on this after Mr. Crozier has commented. Is there anything we can do about that within the context of this application and this committee?
Yeah, very good question. I've been listening intently to what Seamus has been saying. Sorry, Seamus. We've known each other for 25 years, by the way, just to put a bit of context. He was Secretary of the Western Counties and he worked for Devon County Council Farm Estates. And I was very much involved for many years on tenants' affairs, agricultural tenants' affairs. That's how we came into contact. In the precise question, and I think Seamus tried to answer it for you, this business about standard man days, there is a table listing all the jobs and all the rest of it you do on the farm, and it calculates up, add, multiply for each operation, and it's called standard man days. And I think, refresh me if I'm wrong, it just about got there as far as a standard man unit for the year, bearing in mind a person isn't expected to work 365 days a year. We usually do, but that is the situation. It's the definition. The way I look at it is not only the agricultural work; it's the security of the premises. We've had three nighttime robberies in the area in the last 12 months, where thieves have come in, professional thieves have come in, and with cutting tools and cutting their ways into buildings which were thought to be well protected. The thieves didn't get away with everything because, fortunately, one of the items stolen had a tracker on it, and the tracking company informed the person whose item was being stolen from at 4 o'clock in the morning, saying, "Your machine is going up the A386 towards Oakhampton." 4 o'clock in the morning.
I think we're sort of drifting off the subject a little bit.
Yes, sorry. But the point was security, Mr. Chairman, and we do have a problem with security in rural areas.
Yeah. You have a question for Councillor Crozier? You put your microphone on.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah. Right. Planning balance 9.1, starting from the word "the" at the right-hand edge, the tilted balance ways. Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah.
What is your view on that? On that analysis?
On that particular one, it delivers one additional unit of residential accommodation. However, the harm rising from this development in terms of isolated location and impact on the national landscape significantly and demonstratively outweighs the benefits. Quite frankly, that's a load of tosh. I've got photographs from my phone will disprove that. Unfortunately, the planning officer's photograph at the beginning wasn't taken at the same angle as I've taken photographs, and they disappear.
Okay. I think you've made the point. You've made the point. Any other questions for Councillor Crozier? Okay, thank you. I'd also just like to come back to Councillor Jury on his rhetorical question.
So the answer to your question is no. Currently, the application before you, which is the one that you need to consider, is an application for an agricultural workers dwelling. If the applicant wants to, in essence, they would need to make a new application for a rural workers dwelling and include the evidence of all of the other uses that are on the site. The other uses on the site are not agricultural. And so it's very clear that you are being asked today to consider, is there an agricultural justification for an agricultural workers dwelling on this site? Seamus's advice is there is not. Our recommendation is that it should not be approved. If the applicants want to then come in with another application for a rural workers dwelling, they are obviously free to do that, and then they could maybe go into more detail about the other activities that they've got on the site. I mean, they did submit it as part of this application, but it cannot be considered if we're just considering it as an agricultural workers dwelling.
Okay, just a supplementary, just to clarify. So what we, at the moment, in all the reports that have come forward, have failed to do is to justify that agricultural workers' role. However, one of the reasons that is given, policy reasons is given for refusal is in TTV 26, which explicitly states a rural worker. So I'm just kind of struggling with that a little bit at the moment, but I take your point.
Right. Hang on a minute. I'm coming to you. We've had the registered speakers. We're now in debate before we go to a vote on this. So anyone wish to speak in debate before we do so? I think Councillor Moody does and Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Just before you went into debate, I was going to ask a question, but the question basically is, I did ask earlier about how the balancing was explained and told that it's in the report. I found the one paragraph at 9.0, the planning balance. But the question is that the officer's report says that that the harm arising significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits. That's a subjective statement, and I would like to know how that conclusion was established and how significant and strong is that that harm. It's fine to be told there is harm, but we need to know as a committee what that harm is and how it is established that the harm is significant. Thank you.
So the policies which the case officer has to assess this application against, one of the main ones is TTV 26, which requires justification for dwellings in the countryside, which this is. The applicants decided they would apply for an agricultural workers' dwelling. They didn't have to do that. They did apply for that. That is the description of development.
That wasn't the question.
I'm just going through
the answer. I'm sorry, you're getting to the answer.
I'm sorry, I'm just getting to it. And we are now in a situation where, the case officer consulted the agricultural advisor about whether or not the enterprise, in agricultural terms, met the tests that he applies, and his conclusion was that it did not financially or functionally. I appreciate there's a difference of opinion between the applicant's agent and our advisor, but we have to rely on our advisor, and why we've got to a position where, in agricultural terms, it doesn't justify a need. You mustn't also forget that, in addition, there is the Tamar Valley National Landscape objection to this proposal. And again, we consulted the relevant body. They recommended refusal on the basis that there is harm caused by the visual impact of the lodge in the national landscape. So there are two reasons for refusal. We mustn't forget that. So in terms of the policies, we have to rely on the development plan. The development plan says what it says. Now, you will all also know that the NPPF 2024 imposed many more houses on the borough, and as a result, any additional, and also imposed the tilted balance, which allows us to consider housing in a sort of more supportive way, if you like, rather than a negative way, which was the case previously when we had a 5-year housing land supply. In this case, you rely, what we are here to advise you in our professional judgment as to whether or not the harm outweighs that tilted balance argument. We have recommended to you that it should be refused on the basis that we consider the harm to the national landscape and the fact that there is no essential need for an agricultural workers on this site to be significant enough to go against the tilted balance.
Councillor Reid.
A question, sir. Thank you. He was strongly against the notion of the national landscape significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits. Now, you said there's quite a long report that's not actually included in these papers. What does it say? What does it say that makes it seem so demonstrably outweigh the benefits when you've got a small building almost totally next door to another one? I can imagine that, because I know that area very well. I know most of the peninsula very well. I can't imagine many directions from which you'd see that where you'd think, my goodness, that looks ugly.
The application before you is for an agricultural workers dwelling. In terms of the Tamar National Landscape, I can't quote to you what the report said, what her report says, and it's not her judgment, it's the planning officer's judgment. Okay. So the planning officer, please may I finish?
Sorry.
The planning officer has considered all of the issues relating to this application from a planning policy perspective and any other material considerations, and has judged that the harms caused to the national landscape and to the and the fact that there's not essential need for it to be there, and has made that judgment. It's not another consultee who's made that judgment, it's the planning officer. And as a result, that is why you have the recommendation before you.
In which case, if that particular aspect is so important to this decision that we're being asked to make, why weren't we given the chance to go and do a site visit?
Okay, I think, your opinion is yours, and you'll vote.
Sorry, Chair, I think it's a failure of process.
Councillor Leach.
Sorry. Process. Yes, I dare say we could have had our debate, or are we still in questions? Are we still in questions, or are we still in debate? Okay, I was going to do this in debate. Yeah, okay. We could have had a site visit if, I assume, the board members had asked for one. Yes? Yes, right, so that's that. As far as I can see, this is a brilliant asset for the community, and it's something we shouldn't be losing. I know what the officer is before us, and we have to stick to policy. And this is raise a question and debate. Is it possible to look at this particular application and say, can we have a 2-year extension on it with a condition for landscaping, which one they would give them 2 years to actually come up with the right information and the right application that can go through, and also would hopefully keep the Tamar people happy as well.
The first question, it is the recommendation that we are giving you is based on agricultural, whether there's an agricultural need for the dwelling to be, or the lodge to be on site. That has not been proven. If the applicant were to consider applying under the rural workers need, then it may be that we could consider it under that, and then we would reconsult, and we would also probably include a business aspect in terms of the determination. So we wouldn't necessarily we would go to Seamus, but we would also then go to maybe Chris Shears, for example, to establish whether or not the business, number one, warranted an agricultural workers dwelling, because actually, and also whether they need to actually live on site. So, I can hear from everyone in the room that the business is supported and provides a valuable asset to the people of Booth. The application needs to be a different one, and that's not what we've got currently in front of us. And the second part of the question, I completely forgot what it was.
It was about landscaping and
landscaping. Yeah, potentially landscaping could improve the visual impact. It's not an extension because the previous permission has lapsed. So we wouldn't extend it. We would, if as you wanted, it would be. I believe that there is a solution here, and that the applicant should actually apply for a rural workers dwelling based around the business that they operate, not around agriculture. Because whilst agriculture is a small part of it, there's clearly lots of other bits that it is now involved in. And we need to deal with it on the basis of that, and not as an agricultural workers dwelling.
Councillor Southcott.
Chair, actually, it's just a technical matter. At home, I couldn't download the Tamar Valley National Landscape document. I've tried it now, and I still can't download it and read it. Is that just me, or is it?
I will try as we're talking and see if I can do it in the meantime, if that's acceptable.
Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers, for your input today and our expert. I'm struggling to understand why a further temporary period is not acceptable, given that it was approved before under the same circumstances. It just was some years ago. The council previously granted a 4-year temporary dwelling to give the business time to establish, which seems, from what the applicant has said, that it is developing and a profit is being made. What isn't clear to me is what has materially changed in the meantime since that decision, and what evidence demonstrates, other than it isn't applicable to a agricultural worker and maybe a rural worker. What's different from last time? And that's just where I'm coming from. So without that explanation, I find it difficult to see why an extension would be unreasonable.
Okay, thank you. Any other points on? Councillor Jury.
Thank you. Well, I share the views of some of my colleagues here, and I also appreciate Mrs. Houselander's point about the nature and the specific wording in this application. I'm a little confused because looking at the reasons for refusal, it seems to me that this is an amazing facility that does a huge amount of good in the community, and that actually it meets quite a lot of the criteria that are being quoted as part of the refusal reason. So if I take SPT1, for example, we should be supporting growth and change that supports a sustainable economy and opportunities for business growth, as well as environmentally conscious business development. And I think this application seems to me to do all of that. If I look at SPT2, find that, within SPT2, there's a provision to provide services and facilities that promote equality and inclusion and that provide for all sectors of the local population and have facilities to meet identified needs of the local community, including provision of education and training opportunities and employment use. And I think it does all of that. If we look at TTV1, prioritising growth, in smaller villages, development will be permitted if it is demonstrated to support the principles of sustainable development, SPT1, SPT2, and TTV26, which I'll come on to later. If we look at TTV2, if I can just find that and quote from that, if I can find it, give me a second. So within TTV2, sustainable development that enhances or maintains the vitality of rural communities, that supports the growth and expansion of rural businesses, that leads to the development and diversification of agricultural and other land-based rural businesses. And so I can go on. So my feeling is, and even Dev 15 supporting the rural economy, that all of those policies support this proposal. The one thing that it seems to fall down on is TTV 26, meeting the essential need of, as it stated, an agricultural worker. From what's been put forward, it seems to me that finding the justification to support a rural worker ought to be achievable on this site, and that it's unfortunate that the application hasn't come forward with that in mind. But that seems to be the only thing that this is falling down on. Regrettably, that, we're here looking at policy, but it also, and I use this expression, makes me quite angry that we've had some housing applications that have come forward where we've essentially been told that TTV 26 and 27 are out of date and we shouldn't apply them to those particular applications. So the whole, to diversify a little bit, the whole planning system seems to be an utter mess at the moment, that we can't support something of this nature, but housing applications that don't meet our policies go through on the tilted balance because they don't cause more harm than benefit. It just seems absolutely weird and out of kilter, but I'm still thinking about where we go on this. But I think an application, I would certainly recommend, whatever happens, well, if we don't approve this, that the applicants put forward an application along the lines of the one that Mrs. Houselander was talking about.
Councillor Mott, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the comments that have been made by some of my fellow councillors. However, I'm struggling to see the justification given that there was a 3-year approval, not a 4-year approval. And as I've said before, I fully appreciate that COVID was at the beginning of that, but given that this application was granted in June of 20 and not at the beginning of the lockdown, etc., and the fact that they've had extra time to prove the need, be it agricultural or rural workers dwelling, and that we have had reports from various officers that have said that they do not meet that need, and that that they have failed to demonstrate that within their reports, and that we have had an objection, although we've not been able to see the exact wording of that, we have had an objection from the Tamar Valley with regard to the impact. Now, I appreciate that there's a difference of opinion on whether that's impacted or not because of where it's sited, etc. But we do have to follow that advice in that there is an impact on there from a qualified source that is able to give us that information. Therefore, I am struggling to understand why, if they've had now 5 years to provide the need and the evidence that there is a need, why we need to extend that further. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Reid and
Yes,
Councillor
thank you,
Wickham,
Chair.
then we'll draw it to a
Looking at 10.1 with regard to the business support, I presume the detail has been done by, Chris Shears has disappeared. I believe Chris Shears was the person who wrote the report. Is he available for us to get some further detail on their current business effectiveness? Or is that
Chris
too
Shears
late?
has not written any report in relation to this application.
No, I was given to understand that he was involved in the business aspect of it.
No report has been received from Chris Shears in relation to this application.
That doesn't accord with information I've been given outside this room.
Okay, Councillor Wickham.
Thank you, Chair. We've been told today that they have horses, chickens, lambs and pigs, and although that might not be the major part of their business, it still is very significant, and I would think that that is enough of an agricultural need.
Well, we're heading towards concluding this application. I'll just perhaps put my own thoughts on record. I think I agree with the planning officer's assessment that it's a shame that we weren't looking at a different application, but we are looking at the application that is in front of us, and the application is to justify an agricultural workers' dwelling. And our agricultural assessor has said that that evidence is lacking. So my mind is that I will support the officer's recommendation. However, I think the applicant who has heard this debate should be encouraged to put forward an application for a rural workers' dwelling with perhaps also some landscaping initiatives. And I feel from the debate we've had today, which has been a very full debate, that were that done, this application would probably be accepted. I can't vouch for that because we don't accept applications until we actually accept them. But we are looking at what's in front of us. That's the decision we're obliged to make or judge on, and that's where I stand on this one. So the officer's recommendation is for refusal. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Catherine. Guthrie.
Chairman, before you do that, are we have a chance to make our closing remarks rather than questions? Oh, my debate's all been questions so far.
Do you want to make one further comment?
I will do, please, thank you. Yes, I got three things. I think the landscape criteria is overstated. This site, from all directions, doesn't interfere with the landscape in terms of opinion. It's a cluster of buildings in the countryside. We see that all around Devon. As we know, it's a beautiful county. I also think the agricultural versus rural worker issue is partly a fault of poor advice. Now, it's not my opinion or not my job to say where there is, but having had the planning officer, the planners suggest a change of application back in 2024, I think it was, they've now been put forward an application that clearly has some grounds for refusal based on planning policy, but not necessarily on the justification of the overall site.
Thank you. With that, we will move towards the vote. So the officer's recommendation is for refusal. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation for refusal, please show.
Six, Chair.
Those against? The application is refused. Thank you for the debate. It was a good debate, and hopefully some good will come from it. Right, we move on to the next application, which is 043426, which is a new dwelling, land at Red Lane, Hatherley. Councillor Wakeham.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking for the applicant. Would you like me to move?
Stay sat where you are. Okay, so we've moved on to the next application, this new dwelling, 0434. And I'll ask the officer for her report.
Okay, so this one is for the development site at Red Lane in Hatherley, and it is for one dwelling. So this shows you the site location plan, so you can see the main form of Hatherley, and then you can see Red Lane leading up to the site, and then the lane continues back out to the public highway. Again, the orange teardrop shows where the dwelling is proposed. And we've got a slightly bigger site plan that just shows you the access arrangements and the relationship to the neighbour Pinmore to the south. This is the proposed block plan with their landscaping. So it shows the dwelling, you've got the garage, the driveway, and there is also a little shed just within the garden. It shows the hedges to be retained and the planting that's been proposed. These are the proposed elevations of the building. You can see the location of the solar panels, and there's an indicative site of an air source heat pump. These are the northwest and northeast elevations, so that just shows you how you get into the garage and the main front door. This is the ground floor plan, so you've obviously got garage and internal access into the house. There's an office and a fifth bedroom on the ground floor, as well as a bathroom and the normal living spaces. And then the first floor plan, you've obviously got the bedrooms, bathrooms, and it just shows the space for the lift shaft coming up by the stairs. This is the view northeast up to the site entrance, so the rendered bungalow that you can see in the foreground, that's Pinmore. This is the view southwest along Red Lane, so Pinmore would be on your left in this image. This is the existing site entrance. This is the track. And this is the view southwest over Pinmore. Not the best day for the site visit, but this is the view southeast across the countryside. You can see the mast in the left-hand side of the image. So if you've seen that on maps, that just kind of helps you get your bearings. And then the view north, so you can see faintly where the access point will be in the middle of the image. And then there is an existing site entrance. This would be, there'd be some extra reconfiguration as part of the application. So the application has unfortunately been recommended for refusal, and that is due to the fact that the scale of the dwelling is contrary to policy Dev 8, in that it is too large to meet local need. And then as a result of the large floor space, the actual design of the building itself renders it unduly visually prominent within the public realm. And so those two together have formulated the reasons for refusal.
Thank you. Questions for the officer? Councillor Leach.
Just a simple question, I hope. I know from previous planning applications it's had permission, that piece of land, for a bungalow, dormer bungalow, etc., etc. Any idea why that was not built? Because as I see it, the main reason that was just because of the size of the building.
So you'll have to ask the applicant why they didn't consider continuing with that permission itself. But in terms of the application that we've got today, the principle of development on that site is accepted by the council. So that's not at issue.
Yes, that's quite an important point, that we're not talking about the principles of development, we're simply talking about the actual development itself. Any other questions for the planning officer? Councillor Moody.
As per normal, I've got a couple of questions. Given that we've got the tilted balance because of the 5-year land supply, the principle of development was considered acceptable at a pre-app stage. The assessment, you have demonstrated that the identified harms significant and demonstrably outweigh. That's because of the size and the form of the building. I just wanted to know, as a result, can you confirm the proposed floor space, because that's not included in, and you have you refer to the NDSS benchmark for a 4-bedroom house. Can you explain how significant the exceedance is in policy terms under DV8? And what evidence you have that it results in harm to the local housing need? Because the housing need is a combination of dwellings, some small, some large, some 3-bedroom, some 4-bedroom. So I'd like the question to, where's the evidence, basically? What's the floor space? How relevant is it to the NDSS? And how is that weighed against the local housing need?
So the floor space is measured at circa 210 square metres. The NDSS for a 4-bedroom dwelling is 124 square metres. The evidence in terms of DEV8 is taken from the census, which is provided as part of the officer report. And that shows that we've got high levels of under-occupancy. So that means that the local housing population needs smaller dwellings rather than larger ones. And in that regard, we've weighed it up and considered it contrary to policy DEV8.
Thank you. I think I've put all 3 questions into one. Thank you.
Happy to help. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at page 24, working from the bottom upwards, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 planning statements there. Applications going up to the 3rd from the top, detached dormer bungalow. Am I to assume that this current design does not qualify as a dormer bungalow? Because it says here, application invalid, and then it goes up to 2nd from top, outline permission to attach dwelling house. So further down, they seem to have conditional approval for a bungalow, as has been questioned by previous councillor here. And now the design has changed. Is that the root of what the problem is in terms of giving this application approval?
So it's not the case that we would only accept a dormer bungalow on the site. Each application is considered on its own merits, and this one has been considered afresh.
What I'm confused about is the fact that further back in time, they had conditional approval for a dormer bungalow, and it didn't go ahead. They did 1st of 12th, 2020. So, taking into account with the previous application, there might be something to do with COVID, I don't know. I'm just curious to know what the reasoning is behind this.
You'd have to speak to the applicant and the agent.
The applicant is coming to the committee, so. Yeah. Any other questions for the planning officer before we move to the registered speakers? Okay, thank you. We have 2 registered speakers, and the first is Chris Brown-Martin? Chris Brown-Martin here? Thank you very much. Welcome to the committee. You've got 3 minutes to talk to the committee, and then the committee have an opportunity to ask you questions. So when you're ready, press the right-hand button on the speaker. If you could move the speaker device fairly close to you, we'll be able to hear what you say. You just move it closer to you. Lovely. And press the button. Yeah.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Oh. My name is Chris, and this application is for a family home for my partner, Lindsay, and my children. I'm a local employer, and we are committed to retaining in Haverley long term and continue to contribute to the local community. The principle of the dwelling on this site has already been accepted through our outline permission, and the officer's report also confirms that the site is in a sustainable location. This is not to speculative development or housing scheme. It is a single self-built home designed around family long-term needs. A major part of the design related to my medical condition. I have a progressive lung condition which already affects my breathing, my mobility over the time. I'm likely to require oxygen support and wheelchair accessibility. The aim of the house is to allow me to remain as independent as possible, to continue to live safely with my family as my changes need. The office report suggests the proposal would not meet local housing needs. However, the figures with the report shows there are fewer 4-bedroom homes across Devon than Hull. We therefore believe the proposal complies with the policy Dev 8 because it provides a home for a young working family. Especially is designed around the future accessibility needs, and I would not increase a 4-bedroom home housing above the county's average. In paragraph 3.4, the officer report is also stated that the local planning authority seeks to encourage dwellings designs to meet a specific need, which is exactly what we are trying to achieve here. We also note that the previous permission have already been granted on this site, and the following decisions with the officer, we reduced the height, bulk and mass of the design during the pre-application stage. The footprint of the house, excluding the garage, is only 4 square metres more than the approved scheme. The site is a large plot, and we feel that the final design sits appropriately its surrounding and would not appear out of place. Importantly, the officer's report confirms there are no objections in retaliation to highways, drainage, biodiversity, neighbours' impact, heritage or sustainability. We respectfully ask members to consider the full planning balance and support the applications. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and well done for sticking to the time limit. Do we have questions, please, for Mr. Martin? Absolutely.
Thank you very much. You said that you had a previous planning application that was approved. Can you tell me what the square footage of that application was? The square footage of this application is 210 square metres. What was the previous that was approved?
If that was 210, and this is only 4 square metres more, I believe that should be or less. Sorry, my maths have gone out the window. I'm sitting in front of you lot, so.
That's okay. Well, I'll ask the officer that question later for clarity. Just so we can get a comparison between what was approved and what this is. Thank you.
My question, why didn't you build the dormer bungalow that you had planning for in the first place?
When we previously bought the land, it had outline planning. We then went in to put in the planning. When we went to put in the, sorry, hang on, can I just start again? I had an head injury and brains. We bought the land with outline planning. We then, I believe, I've got my planning advisor up with me if they could answer some of these questions. My memory's not very good from an injury. Bought the land, had outline planning on it. We then went to put in for the planning. Brian may have to just confirm on this. What I remember is when we went to put in the planning originally, there was a few objections about using the bottom entrance. Then there wasn't a red line on the map, which should have been on the map previously when the planning was granted. So then there was no decision made. So then we had to then put in for the outline planning on site again. Obviously, I work in the community. I live in the community. Yeah, I want to live there and probably die in that house. And I want to get on with my neighbours. Some of them have got worried about using Red Lane, and if we can take the pressure off them by putting this planning in and coming out the other entrance, small town, yeah, I want to get on with people, yeah. So that was one of my main things of just keeping people happy. And
if I can just come back on that, there was planning for a dormer bungalow. Yes.
Outline planning.
Yeah.
Yes.
Why didn't you stick to the dormer bungalow instead of going for the bigger property?
Housing needs, and to make sure there's space for a wheelchair access for myself. As you can see in the design, we put in for a lift to be put in, and that is basically quality of life. So make sure I can be able to go upstairs, live upstairs, come back downstairs, talk to my kids like any normal person, and basically not trying to be a drain on the society and actually provide for myself. Sorry, but that's, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Okay, well, our next registered speaker is Councillor Wakeham. No need to come to the other end of the room, but I do have to remind you that you won't be taking part in the debate.
No. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers, for your report. The first reason for refusal relates to the number of bedrooms and the amount of floor space proposed, as the scheme exceeds the nationally described space standards. Those standards set out minimum expectations. They are not intended to operate as a ceiling on the size of a dwelling. I have seen no policy basis or evidence that would justify restricting the size of this self-built home on that ground. Furthermore, considerations relating to housing mix and local housing need are matters typically applied to estate housing or wider residential developments rather than to an individual self-build proposal of this nature. The second reason for refusal is the suggestion that the scheme would cause visual harm. Respectfully, I do not agree. This is a well-designed contemporary dwelling, proportionate to its plot and carefully considered in its siting and form. Its visibility is limited, with views principally available from Red Lane, a route that is only lightly used. In my view, the proposal would not harm the character of the townscape and would instead sit comfortably within its setting. In relation to low-carbon design, a significant degree of thought and care has been given to the environmental performance of the dwelling. The proposal incorporates solar panels, air source heat pump, high levels of insulation, and electric vehicle charging. Taken together, these measures demonstrate a clear commitment to sustainable design and align closely with West Devon's objectives for low-carbon housing. This application complies with the relevant local policies and in several respects goes beyond baseline expectations. Environmental considerations have been addressed thoroughly, including biodiversity enhancements through insect-friendly planting and additional trees. The site is also sustainably located with safe and convenient walking access to the town's services and facilities, including shops, post office, medical centre, school, weekly market, pubs, cafe and churches. In summary, the principle of development has already been accepted. Housing need and mixed policies do not, in my view, properly apply to an individual self-build proposal of this kind. The design, scale and massing are appropriate to the plot. There would be no harmful impact on local heritage, and the scheme offers clear sustainability benefits. For those reasons, I urge members to support this application.
Very much. Questions for Councillor Wakeham? Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeham. Just a question. In your last statement there, at the end of your statement, you said that the size of the building relates to the size of the plot. Can you tell us what the size of the plot is?
I can't tell you what the size of the plot is, but visually, the house looks very comfortable on the plot. Perhaps the officers know the answer to that.
Do we have a definitive answer at all from anybody?
I think you can see from the picture the plot and you can see the house. So you can see the relation of the plot to the house, or the house to the plot. Any other questions for Councillor Wakeham? Right. Okay, we're now in debate. Any matters of debate any of the committee wish to raise before we go to a vote? Councillor Reid, you go first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to follow up on the remarks made by Councillor Wakeham with regard to the issue 1 and regard to the fact that this exceeds the NDSS.
Yep.
Something I have to say I'm not terribly familiar with. What is stated in the NDSS that makes it relevant to this particular application? That's a nationally described space standard. Now we've found the right page. Yeah. What's their criteria? What's the criteria? NDSS says a 4-bedroom dwelling, and it's in combination provided over and above. How much? How big is these qualifications?
I think if I could sort of interpret the question, the planning officer's looking a bit confused. I think, is it the case that the national space standards lay down guidance on the minimum size of a 4-bedroom house? Does it constrain it to a maximum size?
They don't have maximums, no. So we know that people will come in over the minimum, but it's the degree that they exceed that, excuse me, that we would consider as part of Dev 8.
Can I ask then, if that is the case, why item 1 is actually a reason for refusal? In a sense, if there's no specific maximum, how can you use the NDSS as some sort of yardstick and therefore a process by which one can say yes or no to an application?
So we also use the census data. So the NDSS set out minimum space standards for the number of bedrooms, and the census data shows us that we need smaller houses. So we use those two together to direct us towards delivering those smaller houses. where really large dwellings come in, they are considered contrary to Dev 8 where the evidence supports that.
Is that a policy that makes sense when you're talking about multiple buildings being erected on a given site rather than a single site and a single application?
So we would apply Dev 8 in all cases. It's the weight that we apply to that policy that might change.
Any other matters of debate? Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that point of the NDSS, that it is not a prescriptive organ. It gives you the minimum requirement, and taking into consideration the question I asked about housing need. One of the part of the refusal is that the dwelling is less likely to meet local housing need. We've heard from the applicant that there is a housing need in his personal position, and he intends to live in the property due to ill health. I know ill health isn't a material planning issue, and also taking Councillor Wakeham's point and looking at the map of the size of the square footage versus the plot, from the plan it doesn't look over-dominant to me. I'm still not sure how I shall vote, but that's the way I'm feeling at the moment. I'm still deliberating. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Leach, did you want to come in?
I'm still reading.
Okay, still reading.
I was just going to mention.
Maybe, are you okay?
Question.
Okay.
Dev 8. No, it's 1. Yeah, it is. Little 2, housing suitable for households with specific need. Has that been looked at specifically for this application?
So in my report, at section 3.6 and 3.7, 3.8.
Just give the committee time to fish that bit out. I can see people wanting to read that. Okay, any other matters of debate before we move to a vote? No? Well, the officer's recommendation is for refusal. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation for refusal, please show.
There's one, Chair.
1. Those in favour of not supporting the officer's recommendation, please show. So the recommendation has not been supported. We need a counter proposal that we can perhaps vote on. Yeah. Were there any abstentions? I forgot to ask. Okay. Want to do it again?
Chair, I'm sorry, you've asked for those in favour but not against.
Let me do the voting again, because I think there was an element of confusion there. Those who are wishing to vote in support of the officer's recommendation for refusal, please show. That's 1 vote. Those against the officer's recommendation for refusal, please show. Those abstaining, please show. The officer's recommendation is not carried. That is not, that does not support the proposal. We need a counter proposal that we can perhaps put to the vote to see if there is support from the committee. Would anyone like to put a proposal forward? Councillor Leach.
It won't be a particularly good proposal, not from me, but I feel that Dev 8, if it's a planning balance, I use Dev 8 as that balance, basically to say that I believe there are special circumstances for this building and the size of the building, and therefore, I disagree with the officer's suggestion.
Sorry, can I just clarify? The proposal, therefore, is that you think, because of the specific requirements of the applicant,
yes,
that Dev 8, the weight should fall on the opposite. Yeah, okay, fine, that's fine. I'll put that in.
Councillor Moody.
If I could help, I'll give you some headings. Tilted balance.
Yep.
The principle of development of the site has been established. The harm does not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. It's a sustainable form of development, and they're a local need.
I think there might be one other contributory factor is that we have declared a housing crisis, and this is a house.
Besides big enough for 10 houses on there.
Can I just make it clear, in the proposal, are we making sure that this application, if we are refusing it, is because there is a special circumstance as well, to make sure that's part of the proposal? Well, not just a local need, specific.
And also, it's important that if you want to, with that proposal, we will need to put some planning conditions on it. I mean, Brian's got a rough list which he could tell you about, but we would have to, whether members would want us to agree with the chair and vice chair after the event, but that would be required as well.
It's one of those conditions that this house is specific for the applicant.
Well, I'd caution against that, because if the applicant wants to live somewhere else in the future, then we couldn't require them to take the building down. So it's been advanced on the basis that it's a self-build, so we can put a condition on that it is required to be lived in by the applicant for a period of 3 years post-construction, but we can't put any other restrictions on it.
Chair, the removal of permitted development rights, is that something would be included as well?
We are discouraged from putting that onto applications these days, but if members were keen for that to be put on, we could. So, for Councillor Leach, if I can just paraphrase what I think you're suggesting is the proposal. The proposal is to approve the application, subject to conditions which will be agreed between the case officer, myself, and the chair and vice chair, but to be subject to a self-build condition, which means that the applicant must live in the house for the next 3 years, 3 years post-build, post-completion. Yeah, I think that's it. Are you happy with that as a proposal?
Happy with that.
Okay. Are we content as a committee that we know what the proposal is that we're about to vote on? That the new proposal is for approval subject to those conditions being agreed by the planning team and myself and the vice chair.
Does it require seconding, Chair?
Do I have a seconder? I have more than one seconder. Okay, so we're now voting on the new proposal, which is for approval subject to those conditions. Can I have a show of hands, please? Unanimous. Thank you very much. So the application is approved subject to those conditions. Okay, that's got the simple bit out of the way. We now move on to agenda item 8, which is the undetermined major applications. Our information has been updated with those red comments as you see them.
Just for clarity, just moving down to it, sorry, just bear with me. The application number 2754/25/4 has actually been determined and it was refused. So that shouldn't continue to be on the list.
2754. That's land at High Hampton.
Yes.
That one. Okay.
That one's been refused under delegation. And the final one on the list should have been described as still within the consultation period. So no recommendation, or we haven't got any comments back yet. So
Right,
it's still
okay.
quite early in the process.
Okay, anyone want to raise any comments on those? In which case, I draw the committee.
Chair, just for clarification, the other items on the list, because we've got red text in there, that means we don't need to consider them at this stage? I just thought we were going to talk our way from top downwards, 0440/24, etc., and then 025, etc., and so on. We're not going to discuss those. You don't need to.
Well, by exception. So if there are any that you particularly want to discuss.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's draws the committee to a close. Thank you very much. And as this is my last committee as chair, thank you very much. I wasn't looking for applause.